And welcome back to another episode of Tidal Flooding Talk. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci. Joined with me, Palma, Shiles. Dan could not make it today. He actually got caught in some really bad traffic and can't make it today. And that is the real story. He was not lying to me. So we'll see him next week. Palma, what's going on? Any bad traffic recently in at the Jersey Shore that you know of?
Well, I'm actually wondering, how do you know that he wasn't lying to you? Did he prove this somehow, or?
Well, I think he gave me enough context. Either he told a good story or he's giving me a lot of, or he told me a lot of context clues. It sounded like, he said he was coming home from work. He said his GPS said, like 20 minutes after the start time. He said it's an emergency accident situation. So I'm going to say he's fine. But I'm going to say he was correct. But good point.
No,
Good point.
I agree. Dan doesn't lie like that, but it is getting crazy what people do with AI now. You could just like send fake traffic certain places, whatever, but
Ken, fake weather too. I got a little duped by a tornado that someone showed me in Virginia like 2 weeks ago, or someone texted me from Virginia 2 weeks ago. They're like, "Hey, my sister-in-law saw this," and I was like, "Oh wow!" And then kind of like checked in with somebody. Shout out to Jackie Layer at DC News Now, and we were like, probably AI. So I got caught with that. Anyway, enough about this. Let's bring in our guest here for today. Ivis Garcia. She's an associate professor at Texas A&M University. She's in the landscape architecture and urban planning department. And she's going to talk to us today about the difference between, or trying to reconcile between affordability and safety when it comes to the United States tidal flooding and the housing shortage that we see here. She wrote a really nice article in theconversation.com. You can check it out about it. And we are going to welcome her to the show. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much, Joe and Palma, for the invitation.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're glad to have you on here. We know that you usually focus on Texas and Puerto Rico. So I'm sorry that, we don't have any of those connections here, but, we're all along the coast. We all have to deal with flooding and where to live. In New Jersey, what we find here is that a lot of these flood-prone zones are actually where the most expensive housing is. Because people want to be by the bay or by the beach where this flooding is occurring. You gave an example here at the beginning of your article that was like a beautiful home in California, good jobs, good schools, but it goes for nearly $1 million. And then option B was a similar home in Texas for about $400,000, but option B has a bigger flood risk and a bigger hurricane risk. So it's interesting to see those differences here. So that was a hypothetical scenario, but this is a real thing that people are choosing, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And as you say, Joe, like in a lot of like coastal areas is where you have like the most expensive housing, and that is like very vulnerable to flood risk and also to just like coastal erosion in general. But a lot of the research that I do is mostly with like people that are not living in these areas. And I will say that the majority of us and the majority of Americans are not living in the coastal areas and in homes that are like with very high prices, right? So when I post the example of like a home in California, that's like basically your average like price home, right? And then when you have someone looking for a place to move because of affordability, right? So we're saying that affordability in the minds of Americans is like more important, right, than thinking about flood risk. And I think that something I didn't mention in that article, but like we saw a lot of like these trends of people moving from California to Texas, for instance. It was that people have like more flexible opportunities to find a job and then people were able to move to these like cheaper places. But remember that they're like new to these like environments, so they might move to a place in where now with a home that I sell somewhere that is like more expensive. Perhaps I can now move to the coastal area first of all, right? Because it's the arbitrage and it's like the mismatch of doing that. But and a lot of places like here in Texas, it will be like in the Houston area, not the coast, but it's like places where it floods, and in some states there's not a lot of like disclosure of like, and that's something that changed during Harvey as well. We see like more states having some, when you're buying and selling a home, some disclosure of like displaced floods and so on, and a lot of it is kind of more like the historical memory. So it could be that someone from that area might know or might be related. It's also at the regional scale that probably doesn't happen as well, but people might move into this place and then looking for that affordability, they might end up in a place that it has like more risk. And I can also tell you more about because again, I work a lot with like low income families as well here, like in Houston. So some families where have like they are moving because where they live it flooded already, and that now they're looking for an affordable home somewhere else, and the money that they have in order to do that, if they needed to move because of, say, like a mandatory buyout, a place that it really floods and people are just saying, okay, you just have to move somewhere else. So when they're like looking for new housing, it's like in many places in where there's not a lot of regulation from developers. They tend to be like sometimes outside of the city and the more like in the county areas in where there's not a lot of, again, those regulations in general, and many of them might end up in areas that do flood as well, looking for homes that they can actually afford, because this is how much they have to spend. If they only spend like $250,000 that they have and they don't want to take a mortgage, I mean, there's nothing that you can find for that amount, right? If it's not in a place that it might have those risks as well. And when you combine that, as I said, with like not having the disclosures, people might end up in a place that is like vulnerable after even already have lost their homes because they were to begin with in a flood risk area.
Sure. Go ahead, Palm.
I wasn't sure if we had time. I'm sorry. I thought we
that's right. We got another minute till break.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about construction practices a little bit because, here at the Jersey Shore, there has been a lot of building in the area, and I think that people sometimes aren't aware as much of what the landscaping does in terms of flooding. So could you tell us a little bit about like permeability and how that affects flooding here for coastal communities?
So definitely, like when you're like choosing like more materials, right? Obviously, having permeable materials is like is better, and then that might be like these are things that you could try to incentivize of developers, and some of them might already come with like, again, some good practices on doing that. But a lot of it is going to be about more like how you canalize the like just the space, right? In terms of like the gutters and all that. But I think, again, what you're going to is more in terms of like the landscaping itself. So yes, definitely like picking the materials is like very important. And as well, like how do you use like green infrastructure? So you can say like this place is going to be dedicated for a park, or this place is going to be just like a green area with like, some rocks and some permeability, in order to just like ease the potential flooding that happens in that place. The cases that I have been mostly looking at in Houston and surroundings areas has more to do with the fact that in unincorporated areas, they might not have zoning or land use regulations. So what you have is a lot of like agricultural land that basically a developer can buy. And because those regulations happen at the city level, if they don't have any zoning or any ordinances, like pretty much there's a lot that developers can do. And that's how like many places might end up in the flood risk areas, if that's like making any sense. So it's kind of like different type of a scenario.
Sure. All right. We're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back here on Tidal Flooding Talk. Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more.
Hello and welcome back to Tidal Flooding Talk. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, and we would like to remind our viewers to be smart with landscaping. The way you landscape impacts flooding. Use native plants, rain gardens, and permeable pavers to let water absorb naturally. Avoid paving large areas. Simple yard choices help reduce neighborhood flooding and protect water quality. Always check with your local zoning officer for your town's specific landscaping requirements before making any changes.
All right, and we are going to continue our conversation here about housing, affordability, tidal flooding risk or flooding risk here. You wrote in your story, climate risk becomes part of the equation, and 63,365 more people moved in than out to those high fire risk counties. So we're going to move from flooding to fire here. Do you see the same kind of crossover with people who are moving into flooding areas as opposed to fire areas?
I mean, I have not done a lot on fire. I must
we're
say.
a flooding show, so that's fine.
Yes, right. But it's obviously like the fires that I have like mostly like looked at are obviously in Hawaii and also in California, and we know that in those areas they were like kind of like higher income places. So I think that something that we could say about that is that as people are displaced, they're going to put pressures in the housing market. So it doesn't matter where they might go, right? So it could be that again because the insurance that they might get is not even with private insurance, it might not be that it covers absolutely everything. So people are kind of like forced to move to places that perhaps are more affordable. And when that happens, right, you have like maybe a higher income neighborhood or area, and that could be also in flyers or flooding, that when they are displaced, again, they're putting those pressures in nearby neighborhoods. And in many areas, we see that like higher income neighborhoods are also close to places that are gentrifying already. It's not like the fire it just started, or the disaster, right? It started the gentrification process. And many times there's people that already higher income moving to these areas, but it kind of like set up a pace in where that goes faster, right? And then when you have a place with like rents that and that is kind of like the next like in gentrification studies you might call that the next like urban frontier, right? So it's places that already are changing, but they're like pretty close to those higher neighborhoods that people feel that this is kind of the next place to move to. So that's something that I have seen in some markets, but to relate it a little bit more with like the interviews and the research that I have done. I was just in Puerto Rico, Joe, when you called me the other day, and I was like doing, yes, I was doing a project, welcoming like people from all over different places in the United States to learn about a case study of like climate gentrification. And in this climate gentrification, the place that flooded actually was like the higher income place. But as people are kind of like displaced, they look for, okay, what's the next place nearby, right? And then just like move to those places, which makes it that it causes the rents to go up, and those lower income neighbors then are going to move somewhere else because they cannot afford it anymore. So at least with those two examples that you gave me, or thinking about fires that I have seen in Hawaii and also LA, those are some of the stories that we have also seen, although that's like potential gentrification pressures surrounding other neighborhoods.
And I know we were touching on this before, but when you researched, people choosing between affordability and safety, do you think that had more of an impact on people buying or renters?
I think that has, I will work a lot with like home buyers or people that are, or have a home, right? That's kind of like the population that I look at the most. I think that I do not concentrate too much in renters, and this is something that is like also very bad for disaster studies. Like we don't tend to concentrate on renters that much, and the reason for that is because, or like federal like housing system, or like how we give aid is mostly to the homeowner, right? So if you're thinking about insurance, if the place like burns, like kind of like that's more like insurance, at the government level, but also if it was in terms of the market, it would be like that insurance of, or like if we give like FEMA assistance, really those are the populations that will get the majority of the aid, right? So up to 35,000 to do repairs and to do what they need to do. The same thing with like the community development grant, disaster recovery funding, and with the mitigation funding. All of that is kind of like directed to homeowners. So I would definitely say that there's definitely a bias, just in general, of like these disaster stories, so looking at the home buyers themselves. I think that of the people that have done like some research on like renters, they will say obviously they're even more vulnerable. And that again, you will, by that we mean is like if they are like displaced from where they are, they will have like less of a safety net, and might end up in a place that is more vulnerable. At the same time, their mobility is a lot higher, right? So even it's not the same thing like if like you're a homeowner and you invest in a place and then you're now in a place that it floods, or if there's more fire, that is it's again it's not you're stuck basically, right? You're stuck. Even though obviously in terms of like losses and safety net, like for renters is bad, but I feel at least is in this case of the affordability and moving to a place, I will say that the risk of homeowners are greater. At least how I see it, because of the investments, right, that they're making into a place.
Sure. All right. We're going to take our last break here. We'll come back with our final segment here on Tidal Flooding Talk. Base flood elevation is the level floodwaters are expected to reach in a major storm. Building below it puts your home at risk. Building just 1 foot above it can significantly lower flood insurance costs and reduce flood damage. And don't forget to elevate mechanical equipment like air conditioners and generators. Small changes can make a big difference. This message is brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition. All right, and welcome back to Tidal Flooding Talk. We're going to get into our final segment here. Tell me this, we talked a lot about, what's going on and in the problems that we do have with this, but are there states or governments or even private organizations that are doing this the right way, making sure people who might be the most vulnerable socially are in places that are safer, environmentally?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, right? So you're asking me who gets the A, right?
Yeah,
as a professor.
Yeah,
instead of the F, I get to give all the grades. Although, like, with great inflation, everybody wants an A, but we cannot
That's
give
right. Yeah,
everyone
we don't bring on a curve here.
an A, yeah. So I think that, Louisiana is like doing very well in terms of like having flood disclosure, the frequency of like how often a place gets again flooded, and then I think that it also calls for like insurance requirements as well, and that's always like a very good thing. So I would say again, those two things make it kind of one of the strongest in the country. I think that New York is also like doing well. So it kind of, you need to report the past flood damage. It's like when you I don't know, if you have a car accident, you're supposed to like report those things, right?
Yes.
And so you're kind of like doing the same thing. If it's a place that has like past flood damage, you're kind of like reporting that.
Is that like repetitive loss? Is that?
Yes. So again, that that could be like really, really good, but not every place does that, right? And then the other thing is like I mean, just like in a lot of places, like for you need to like look at the like 100-year and 500-year FEMA zones for like construction, and that could be like something that everybody actually should be doing, but just like things like reporting like flood insurance history as well. I think that New Jersey does that well as well. So again, I would say those three states are doing really great, but there's other ones that are doing very good as well, like South Carolina, North Carolina, and Mississippi. And then you have I'm not gonna give anyone Fs, but like Texas and Florida, I think they're gonna get Cs.
C's, okay.
They're gonna get Cs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then part of that is like, like in Texas, as I said, like after Harvey, so you do have like a requirement for some flood history disclosure, but it's not like as detailed in other places. So that kind of like makes it incomplete in a way, because people, when they cannot see the full risk picture, so they could do better in there. And similar, I would say that Florida and Texas are very similar in that way. Like Florida, for instance, does not require disclosing like the past flood damage history. So those are the grades. We give a lot of A's, so I think that's a good thing.
Okay, that is a good thing.
Yes, but there's again many states that are there. I didn't even mention them, but yeah, they could also get some C's in there. So
Okay, got it. And you say in New Jersey, like in New Jersey, we also have something called the Blue Acres program. Maybe you're familiar with it, but we have disaster risk reduction areas where the state will go and buy out properties that are, and those are typically lower value homes, probably lower income as well. Do you see that as a good policy?
That's a great question. So that's what I am actually studying in the buyout. It's a mandatory like buyout program in Houston. And they have like a mandatory and a voluntary. And I think that there's a big difference in those two. So for the voluntary, you actually didn't have you didn't have as many people participating in that. Obviously, the mandatory is like you all need to move, and then you must do it like within 6 months, right? Or that all these processes like tend to take slightly longer, so maybe 2 years or so. And these were, as you said, in like low income neighborhoods, and not only the residents but also businesses where have to move somewhere else. So I think that that one of the things I noticed, and this goes to Palma, what you were talking about, like there's renters and there's homeowners, right? The renters are like the mobile home owners, right? Because they actually are treated as renters, and then they don't get a lot of money, and then with their money that they get, they can do a down payment or they can pay rent in a place for a few years. But they are definitely in the losers end in here, right? So because people that are in mobile home parks, they like that they have like the space and they have the land. They cannot find something similar as in renting in a place nearby, right? So they might have to move like somewhere else. So I feel that with a lot of the interviews that I have done, like they do not like these, right? And then for the other people that go to we're in homes, and they have to find new homes, I think that a lot of them they find homes that were good, but unfortunately some of them ended up in places where there might be like higher crime rates, and they didn't didn't know, and there's stories in there of like family members dying, where I'm not talking about like crime rates as in like it's just like something serious. And then and there's something that it's like if you move like neighborhoods, and if you end up if you have so much money that you can get, it's like $250 on average. There's not that many places that you can go, right? So that's something that we know. And the other thing I saw is that some people ended up in very nice neighborhoods, basically like brand new, no flooding, all right? So they were good. But the bad thing is that now they didn't have a mortgage, and guess what? To be in a nicer place, you need to get a mortgage now. And then what we know about interest rates, well, they're a lot higher than when they first became homeowners. Yeah. And many times because you said a lot of these families were lower income, they're also multi-generational families, so you might have like 2 kids are working and the dad is working in order like to support everyone. And I think maybe maybe you have the mom saying this is great place, I feel a lot safer, we move from a community that is better, but the people that maybe are like supporting the household might feel like this is a lot of burden, or so it's kind of like this is kind of like a mixed reports, right, on what people have to say. But in general, what I learned from this research is that that we should not be doing like the mandatory buyouts. We should actually do the voluntary buyouts, and then offer something that is like fair and just. So I think a lot of it, unfortunately, when this happens, is also, you know, when you have the COVID and like interest rates going up, so it becomes harder. But like, and you might budget for something and that might change, but you know, you need to find a way of like actually make this work for families if they are going to voluntarily be moving somewhere else. And the other consideration that we saw a lot is like, in again, lower income neighborhoods, a lot of families might have businesses in the, you know, maybe you with the Houston, that you have like the zoning is kind of relaxed, right? And you might have a business in your home. We are not compensating for a business, right? We're just compensating for the home. So the policy is not looking at those things together.
Got it. Really, you know, substantial conversation here. We're not done with this conversation either. We want to have you back on to talk more about what you find, especially maybe some stories with individual homeowners or renters as well. But we do have to wrap. We are pretty much at time here. But we do want to end, as we usually do, with the one thing we can't stop talking about: tidal flooding or otherwise. I'll start. I did not realize that most people are just kind of okay or so with corned beef and cabbage on St. Patrick's Day. I love it. I think I'm pretty sure I had a pound and a half of corned beef on St. Patrick's Day. I was so full I usually eat breakfast. I am a breakfast every morning person. I did not eat breakfast. I was stuffed until about noon. But I love corned beef. I think if Joey Chestnut and me went head to head on a corned beef and cabbage battle, I'm not saying I would win, but I think I could give him a run for his money. So that's what I got.
Very nice.
Palma, what do you got?
Well, I do want to give a shout out to our friend Cullen, because he made us homemade Irish potatoes. And I don't think I've ever had that before, but they were so good. And we stuck them in the fridge, and they were even better like the next day. But anyway, that's not the one thing I wanted to talk about. Now I'm thinking about, from our episode tonight, I am thinking about Puerto Rico, because we always take a trip there like once a year usually, but we skipped this year because we moved, and got me thinking about it, and we are definitely going next year. I'm not skipping.
Okay, yeah, very nice.
I've never been. I got to get there. Maybe Ivis can take us there.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. I mean, I have shown people that do this kind of work, and so they can see the places that flood and the policies, and all that. And you know, more work needs to be done. I have to say, 10 years. You know, Puerto Rico has been like almost 10 years, just like Houston, of like the recovery, and still, you know, you can see a lot of like brew tarps, and you can see a lot of people without housing and all that. But maybe to tie it to the you know, to Puerto Rico, I would say that everybody that came, because I told you, Joe, that people from the United States were going there. To, you know, talk about like climate gentrification and all that. But they always mention Bad Bunny, you know, like music and dancing. and all that.
Where are you on Bad Bunny? Do you like Bad Bunny? You don't like Bad Bunny?
I'm you know, I like the music, you know, I cannot do it in my Zumba class. I teach Zumba.
Oh, okay.
But I teach it in a church, so I cannot
Oh,
put
okay.
his music because a lot of it is not clean, with the exception of maybe 3 songs that
Okay.
I can play in there. But you know, I think that you know, as I was talking to, because we're talking about climate gentrification, and it was the executive director of the organization that we went. She said, like, you know, we love Bad Bunny. We don't want to talk bad about Bad Bunny.
Right.
But one thing that happened in Puerto Rico is that there has been a lot of like tourism, and because of it, and he said, like, okay, we love tourists, we like tourists. What we don't like is the rents going up because of all the Airbnbs.
Yeah.
So before the hurricane, in the neighborhood that I was like studying, there was 87 Airbnbs, and now I was studying that there's about 1,000, and that has with a combination of like increased tourism after COVID because of Bad Bunny. But we need to do something, and that's what the groups there are trying to do.
Okay.
To do something so we don't transform everything into Airbnbs. And I'm not saying when you go you can stay in an Airbnb, but I'm just saying.
And I don't know what any of the words mean in the Bad Bunny song, but I do like Bad Bunny. But I don't know what the
great
words.
rhythm, great rhythm.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on. You know, we appreciate it. We would love to have you on if you're willing, and maybe talk about some more stories about conversations you've had with people as well. But thank you again for the time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe and Palma.
All right.
All
We'll be back
the
with you next
listeners.
Tuesday. Oh, what's that?
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
And all the listeners, thank you.
That's right. All listeners, yeah, we actually had some pretty good numbers in the month of March. We're going to hope to continue that this week. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Tidal Flooding Talk. New episodes every Tuesday night, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Ivis.
Thanks.